This is a video about British Airways, the flag carrier of the UK. While this airline is beloved by many, some fear that the glorious times of the struggling airline are over. In this British Airways review, I want to find out for myself. Today's journey on board BA goes from Zürich to Barcelona, via London.
How dare you!
While the first leg is flown on a British Airways A319, the second one was supposed to be operated by Finnair. However, this did not happen today. Instead, I got delays, chaos and engine problems. Today's journey starts on a cloudy Sunday morning in Zürich, or more precisely at Zürich-Kloten International Airport. Located just 10 kilometers from Zürich city center, Kloten is the largest and busiest airport in the very affordable travel destination of Switzerland. No, but seriously, if you are planning to come to Switzerland on a budget, don't. Hurts my Swiss heart to say that, but just go to Austria or Romania instead. Your box will get you further, or however you say that. I arrived at the surprisingly busy terminal, and since BA offers an easy-to-use online check-in, I skipped the check-in at the airport, headed to security, and made a quick stop at the Merhaba lounge near the B gates, accessible thanks to my priority pass. The lounge is quite small and basic, but there are some delicious food options, alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages, and a nice view. Somehow I kinda forgot that the UK isn't part of the Schengen agreement, and I realized that I still have to check passport control, which sometimes can take ages here, especially when those Robocops immigration things don't work. Also, like most non-Schengen flights departing from Zurich, my British Airways ride to London-Heathrow leaves from the E-gates, which are located in a satellite terminal connected to the main premises by train. Fortunately, passport control isn't too busy, and I hop on the train that makes every Swiss people cringe.
For now, I wish you a pleasant flight. See you! Auf Wiedersehen!
Endstation. Bitte alle aussteigen. The train is arriving at the final station.
But now let's get this British Airways experience started. As one of the last passengers, I got on board this almost 24-year-old Airbus A319 with the registration GEUPK. Last passenger, but I made it. As you might guess, the aircraft looked a bit dated. It's so old, initially I don't even realize where I can find the seat numbers. But the crew greets every single passenger and are super friendly. At my seat, I get enough time to check out my surroundings before takeoff, as a 20-minute delay is just being announced. We have a tray table, which is a bit dirty, reclinable seats and an adjustable headrest, which can be a game changer if you want to sleep a bit. Furthermore, I found a safety card, a sick bag and a menu that I will check out later. As far as I know, British Airways offers complimentary snacks and beverages, as well as various items you have to pay for. As 20 minutes have passed, we are still on the tarmac waiting for takeoff. Not quite sure if British Airways or Zürich Airport is to blame for that. The pilot keeps us passengers up to date and lets us know that the delay is due to traffic congestion in Zürich. But finally, with a delay of about 30 minutes, we made our way to the runway 28. Seeing one plane lined up after another makes one wonder why Zurich doesn't expand its infrastructure a bit. Unfortunately, due to political reasons, however, that's unlikely to happen on a large scale in the near future. This often results in delays and is quite annoying for passengers and pilots alike. Just listen to this interaction between this air traffic controller and a frustrated pilot who just can't get out of Zurich.
April tells us now you cannot go. What the hell is happening here?
I don't know, I guess your company is doing something with the flight plan. Actually, right now your slot is 1257 till 1312.
Also ist eine Katastrophe. Wir haben 5 Slots, wir sind immer parat und entweder bringt uns der Flughafen nicht raus oder es ist einfach zum Kotzen wieder mal da zu Zürich. Das ist echt, ich habe die Schnauze voll von dem Horadreckplatz. Entschuldigung. 3404, now fully ready.
Sehr professionell.
Ja, hier auch. We've been ready now for 30 minutes. 30 Minuten sind wir parat und der Slot wird permanent umgeschoben. Wenn wir parat sind, ist da einer hinten dran und man kommt einfach nie weg von dem Platz, obwohl man parat ist. Das ist auch sehr professionell. Danke.
Wenn Sie Diskussionsbedürfnis haben, läuten Sie doch an. Das ist gescheiter auf der Frequenz.
Ja, ja.
Oh man, that's not just... Anyway, with a delay of 40 minutes, it's our turn to take off. The cabin crew does an impressive job preparing the cabin for takeoff, something that's unfortunately not the case on numerous other airlines. As we take off into the grey sky and break through the clouds, I realize how short this aircraft actually is. But luckily it's not just about the length, and if everything else is right, you can have a nice flight even with a short plane. At least that's what I have been told. But actually the first flight was relatively eventless. The onboard catering consisted of baked pretzels and a bottle of water. There was no choice between different drinks or snacks, but if you're still hungry, you can buy something from British Airways High Life Cafe, which features different sandwiches, chips, other snacks and various beverages. In this review, I also want to point out that the legroom is quite narrow and that there is no Wi-Fi or power outlets on board. For a 2-hour flight, however, this isn't a big deal. After crossing cloudy Europe, the first leg of my journey was about to come to an end. If I had just known what was still ahead of me, maybe I would have turned back. Also, I booked a seat on the right side of the plane, since I was hoping to catch a glimpse of central London while landing. However, the UK, famous for its great weather, greeted us with clouds that nearly reached the ground. The approach therefore wasn't anything spectacular. Last time when I was in London, I was there in August and caught a cold. For a week it was raining every day with temperatures of 12 to 18 degrees, no cap. At the moment of touchdown, this flight wasn't over. Firstly, we were taxiing for what felt like an eternity. I swear I thought we were driving to Manchester or something. But after the sightseeing trip of London-Heathrow, we finally arrived at a remote gate. My layover in London was just about 1 hour and 45 minutes, and a bus gate meant that the probability of catching my flight just got smaller. I really don't understand why we would go to a remote gate if we were already 50 minutes late. But that was just the beginning. As the passengers were pushing to the doors, just nothing happened. We were supposed to be picked up by a bus, but it just didn't arrive.
Overall, even though we left about 35 minutes late, we tried to make up as much time as we could, but in the end we were 50 minutes behind schedule. I do apologise for the inconvenience to your journey of this, but it's purely down to Zürich holding us on the ground for that long.
A few moments later.
I'm currently on the phone chasing them up. They are aware we're here and they are sending buses to us, but they were unable to provide me some kind of time, which is not the best. So I'm following up. As soon as I get some kind of time estimate, I will come back to you immediately, but hopefully not very long. I'm calling as many people as I can. Hopefully they'll be here soon. Thank you very much for your patience.
3 days later.
So hopefully a couple more minutes, it'll park up and we can get you swiftly on your way. I appreciate this is not ideal, but various angry reports have been filed by ourselves and I appreciate your patience. You'll be pleased to know that the crew, we don't have a bus, so we'll be joining you on this bus to the terminal. Thanks for your patience and look forward to seeing you again soon.
The crew was very polite and tried to calm down the situation. But understandably, some passengers got quite mad. This is the 4th time this year that I arrive at an airport and there are no buses or stairs available, or the jet bridge is broken and an engineer had to be called in from home to fix it. Finally, after a long time of waiting, a premium class bus arrived who brought us to the terminal. The ride was quite long and by the time we arrived, my Finnair flight to Barcelona was already on lost call. As I walked out to the transit area, I could not scan my boarding pass anymore. What a surprise. Fortunately, there were plenty of BA staff ready to help the passengers. Since I bought both flights in a single booking through British Airways directly, I was entitled to be rebooked on another flight for free. Strangely, the staff at the counter just couldn't find my booking, neither with the ticket number nor my passport or the PNR. My data just somehow was not in the system.
Computer says no.
Eventually, however, they could retrieve it and booked another flight for me without cost. Even though it took some time and I was a bit upset that I missed my chance to fly with Finnair again, I have to admit that I was pleasantly surprised by the staff. Everybody I interacted with was extremely friendly and helpful. I feel like the Brits are just way more polite than people in many other parts of Western Europe. Also, I was quite impressed how everyone waited patiently in line, with not a single soul skipping the queue. I know it's a stereotype that British people are very polite, but I feel like it's true. This makes it all more difficult for me to understand why London is supposedly so dangerous. I don't know what's true and what's not, but from what I've been seeing on social media lately, London has become quite unsafe. I really can't comprehend how in a country with people who seem so well-mannered, stabbings, robberies and muggings are commonplace. But of course there are good and bad people everywhere, and at the end of the day I only know these things from social media. But if people from the UK are watching, I would love to hear your perspective on this. But I'm digressing again. Back to the British Airways review. After a quick stop at a Priority Pass lounge, it was already time to board my second British Airways flight. But boarding was delayed due to the late arrival of the aircraft and due to ice under the wings. Our ride down to Spain is an Airbus A320neo, which is just a bit over 3 years old and was delivered to British Airways in 2020. Like on the first leg of this trip, the cabin crew was very polite and attentive.
First of all, I would just like to apologise. We are running a few minutes behind schedule today. The reason for all this is the aircraft arrived in from Stockholm a few minutes behind schedule, and this has obviously had a knock-on effect. Also, we have a bit of ice on the wing, on the side of the wings. The reason for this is, well, it came in from Stockholm where the temperature was very cold, so the fuel remaining was very cold, which has caused a bit of ice to form. We're just waiting for the ices to turn up. They'll do a quick spray underneath the wings and then we'll get you underway. Once underway, we'll push back face to the west and then it'll be relatively long.
But not unlike the first flight, we just wouldn't move. 55 minutes after the boarding closed, we still stood a couple meters in front of the gate. Eventually, the pilot communicated through the intercom that something isn't right with the engine.
We just tried to start one of our engines and we got a small defect with it. I want to have that investigated before we get airborne. So apologies for the delay. I'm just going to return to stand. Our engineers should be waiting for us there, and they'll have a quick look and just assess whether it is a problem we can go with to Barcelona or if we're into maintenance action on the engine.
Seriously, I'm losing my mind here. We've made our way to a remote parking lot where technicians began to inspect the engine. Meanwhile, the hydraulics could be here all the time and the kerosene smell filled the cabin. With a delay of around 1 hour and 20 minutes, a staircase was finally brought to the plane and several people boarded. While the next British Airways flight to Barcelona, which by the way was also late, you can't make this stuff up, had already taken off. We were still standing at the British Airways Engineering Fleet Support Facility. And as we still hadn't moved after the planned arrival time in Barcelona, I started to get a little salty. I'm glad that BA takes safety so serious and I'd rather arrive late than not at all, but it simply shouldn't be the case that both flights are so out of schedule. But as I said, I don't know the extent of which BA is to blame here. Nevertheless, I just don't get why we have to wait here for hours and can't just take a standby plane. I mean, we are at the hub of BA. Finally, with a delay of over 2 hours, the problem is found, an engine start valve fault. Fortunately, it's only a minor defect and we can finally start our journey down to Barcelona. Unlike the first flight, there is Wi-Fi on this plane. So after takeoff, I buy a streaming package for £8, which doesn't live up to its name. The internet is sometimes not even good enough to send a message on WhatsApp. And after about 20 minutes, the internet stopped working at all, and I couldn't even access the speed test page. Also, catering is the same as on the previous flight, and there's not much else to report on this trip, to be honest. So in the end, arrive in Barcelona a few hours later than originally planned, which is really not ideal. But maybe I just was a bit unlucky this time, and despite everything, I have to admit that British Airways seemed professional, friendly and more or less reliable. One airline that is part of British Airways, but where this is not necessarily the case, is Iberia. Click right here to see my disappointing Iberia business class experience. Thank you so much for watching, leave a like, comment or subscribe if you wish to do so, and see you next week.